The agenda this week spoke to Canada's most decorated Olympian, Penny Oleksiak, learned how more of us are hiking the Trans-Canada Trail, and debated the role of private care in our public healthcare system. The agenda's week in review begins in Hamilton, and the debate about growing the city tall or with sprawl.
What started this debate in Hamilton to begin with?
Well, basically, it's a complex situation that has had many twists and turns. But the Ontario government has asked municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which includes Hamilton, places like Peterborough, Niagara Falls, all the way up to Orillia, to plan for growth up to the year 2050. And basically, that means, in Hamilton's case, according to provincial projections, the city can expect another 230,000 people, bringing it to around 800,000 people over 30 years. So the city has been engaged in this complex planning exercise to try and fit all that growth within the city boundary. City planners, however, have said, look, this is a lot to fit into our city boundary. And we think, based on the provincial methodology, which is based on a market-based approach to what people would likely want to have in a type of home, whether it's a single-family home, a condominium, or even a townhouse, or row housing. We think that we're going to need an urban boundary expansion into rural lands of about 1,300 hectares. So that is what is driving the debate, and some anti-sprawl people, as they call themselves, have said, look, that's not good. We need to preserve this farmland, and in the context of a climate emergency, we need to try and prevent any sprawl and to keep carbon emissions down. And of course, this also affects things like infrastructure costs. If you start expanding your city, it's going to cost the city more to pay for things like pipes and roads and fire facilities, for example. However, on the other side of the coin, some of the landowners up there, property developers, are saying, look, we've been sitting on these properties in some cases for decades, and we want to develop them. We believe that Hamilton needs more of these ground-oriented homes, as they call them, to increase the supply, which in turn will alleviate what is an affordability crisis. And that, in a nutshell, is what's happening. City Council has to, at some point soon, sign off on what Hamilton's land needs will be, which will determine whether we have this boundary expansion, or if we hold the urban boundary fixed, as some of the anti-sprawl people are advocating.
Let's put a map up for starters here and just talk about we're going to focus on this area. And for those who are listening on podcast and can't see the map, I'll just describe it a little bit. What you are essentially looking at on the top part of this picture, that's the mountain. That's what everybody calls the mountain. You can tell, right, some of the north-south street names: Upper Paradise, Upper James, Upper Gage, Upper Ottawa. That's the mountain. And then looking south as well. And remember, in Hamilton, the water is north. So at the top of this map, past downtown, is Lake Ontario. The shaded areas that are gray, that's where development is currently allowed. The white areas, which is also known as the White Belt, that's currently farmland, and that's where the city is considering/debating whether or not to allow development in those areas. Now let's get everybody's position on, and obviously there's a lot more gray and there's a little bit of white, and the city's going to determine what's possible under the current circumstances. Let's get everybody's position on the record here. Lloyd Ferguson, should there be development allowed in those white belt spaces?
I'm still listening to that issue. Clearly, there's two sides on this issue, two very strong issues, but we're used to facing those kind of things. We've just dealt with the LRT, although we got 4 years of construction coming now. We're dealing with the Shadow Creek, all this encampment problem we have throughout the city, the Red Hill Valley Judicial Review, and now the urban boundary expansion. On each issue, there's always fors and against. So I'm going to continue listening. I've heard loud and clear from the no side but I'm starting to hear a lot more from the yes side.
John Paul Danko, tell me your view on whether or not development should be allowed in those so-called white belt spaces.
No, I think we need to take a firm line and stop the growth pattern of sprawl development. And this is an issue that's facing municipalities across Ontario. And I think there's a new renewed interest in where we grow and how we grow as a municipality. And I think we need to grow up, not out.
Lily Noble, your view on this?
Hi. Absolutely, we don't need to use the White Belt right now. That is prime agricultural land that needs to be preserved for the future. Back in 2006, lots of land, 11,000 acres was brought into the urban boundary. We haven't used it up. So why would we include more? Is this just a land grab by developers who want to, make tons of money because land that's zoned agricultural, they buy it cheap, and then once it's zoned urban, they can make 10 times more money off of it. So we think it's just a land grab and it's unnecessary, and the sprawl that would occur is just too costly for Hamiltonians.
Mike Collins-Williams, your view?
I think we need a combination of solutions and a balanced approach. Hamilton needs to grow up, meaning that we do need significant increases in intensification, especially around transit and creating a new skyline in Hamilton. We need to build in, which means more missing middle housing within existing neighborhoods. And yes, we do need a small boundary expansion to accommodate a diversity of different housing typologies to meet the full life cycle needs of Hamiltonians.
How meaningful is it to you to be the most decorated Canadian Olympian ever?
I mean, it's honestly more weird for me than anything else. I feel like just knowing myself, I look at myself as like the same grade 9 kid that I was when I was 14, honestly. Like, I see myself that way no matter how old I am. And so for me, it's really weird. And I'll always say to my friends, it's such a weird thing that it's actually me that has 7 medals and is the most decorated athlete. But I mean, just to be able to represent Canada and to be able to be the most decorated athlete in Canada, it's just insane to me.
Now, you broke the record of Cindy Clausen and Clara Hughes, both of whom had 6. Have you spoken to either or both of them since you got the 7th medal?
I haven't got to speak to either of them directly, unfortunately. However, I did get a message from one of the girls when I was doing an interview pretty much just after the Olympics, and I think it was Cindy, and she was like super sweet and really kind, and I'm just like really grateful that I'm even that well known on the world stage like that.
Nice. Where are all the medals, incidentally, Penny?
I mean, ideally, my mom would want them in the safe at like RBC branch or something like that. But for me, I like to keep them just with me in my sock drawer or something like that.
Are you kidding? That's where they are, in a sock drawer?
I don't want to give too much away. I don't want anyone to come to my house. But right now, they are, but they're going to go in the safe soon, I swear.
That sounds like a good move. Okay, very nice. I watched that YouTube video that you made, which I have to say was quite adorable. And in it, you said, your greatest fear in life is open water, which, of course, makes no sense to me. So can you please explain how the greatest swimmer in Canadian history is somehow afraid of open water?
I'm not afraid of pools. Sometimes it depends. Like, if I'm by myself in a pool, it's a little scary. I always like to think of how many sharks could fit in the pool with me. But no, I can't do open water. I'm terrified. I'll start like crying and like hyperventilating as soon as I'm in open water. And I've tried everything, and I can't get over my fear.
Do you appreciate that that makes no sense at all?
Yeah, no, I definitely, yeah, it makes no sense, but I can't do anything about it.
And you've seen the movie Jaws, I presume?
Way too many times, yeah.
Very good. Well, that makes sense. Okay. We have seen in the past year Simone Biles, Carey Price of the Montreal Canadiens, Naomi Osaka, the tennis player. We have seen young and not so young. Carey Price is not so young anymore. High-performance athletes deal with mental health challenges, the likes of which I don't think we've ever seen before, or it certainly has never been this public before. And I wonder, given how much you put into this, whether this is something you think about in your own life.
Yeah, I mean, I struggled a lot growing up with different mental health challenges. I struggled a lot in the last few years with like eating disorders and really trying to figure all of that out. So for me, it's definitely things I have thought about. It's stuff that I've had to learn about. I've had to learn about myself a lot, and I've had to teach the people around me how to deal with things I'm dealing with, and it's definitely been a long learning experience. But I think now more than ever, athletes are speaking out about it to social channels, and they're speaking out about it to media, and I think that's really important because I think it just is gonna kind of push not only other athletes to maybe seek help or maybe to look and see if like they could improve as an athlete or as a person, like dealing with these mental health issues themselves, or if just a regular person is going to actually just go and actually seek help if they see their favorite athlete is also dealing with things and getting help for it. So I think it's really important that athletes are speaking out about the challenges that they've dealt with.
I saw a recent Leger survey the other day which showed the trail use is up 40% year over year. What do you attribute that to?
Well, we wanted to go beyond the anecdotal, but our trail groups are telling us that they're seeing more people out than ever. I'm seeing it. I saw it just this morning. I saw it all weekend as Canadians are outdoors. I think the pandemic and its social isolation has driven people outside where they feel safer, where there's an opportunity to connect. And I think that word connect has had a powerful impetus during the pandemic as people think about how the social order has changed. The pandemic has had profound implications on us all, be they tragic implications, mental health implications, isolated seniors, isolated Canadians of all ages, and being outside and on the trail really has been the healing factor for them. And that's what's showing up in our data too. So not only are they using trails more, but 95% of Canadians in that same survey said that mental health and enhancing their mental health, an equal measure to those saying their physical health, by the way, is really what got them out their front door with their shoes on. And that's the other nice part of the trail, about trails, and the Trans-Canada Trail in particular, is that you don't need a lot of equipment. You know, in Canada, we say there's no bad weather, only bad clothing. And so if you have a warm coat in the wintertime and a hat and a pair of gloves and some decent walking shoes, you can go pretty much anywhere. And that's the beauty of the trail too, because there's an equal measure of that speaks to the equity and the importance of getting outside. And as Canadians were driven indoors, unfortunately, and more isolated, many of us found ourselves, especially if we live in a densely populated urban environment, in our box, sometimes in the sky with no backyard. And so the desire to get outside, because we were living and working in the same environment, became that much more pronounced. So getting outside, connecting to nature, we know that it has positive mental health benefits. We did a campaign with CAMH last year at the onset of winter because we knew what was coming. And we knew that Canadians would profoundly feel the encroaching and oncoming darkness and isolation. And we were concerned about their mental health. And it turns out a lot of people were as well. So our Applause to Oz campaign featured leading Canadians across the country, mayors, Olympic athletes, doing a social media campaign with CAMH and us to talk about those mental health benefits. And I'm seeing that more every day myself as I get out on the trail. And anecdotally, I'm seeing more people. It's allowed me to meet people in my neighborhood that I otherwise would not have met. And I think Canadians are rediscovering their communities, their connections, there's that word again, to each other and to the world around them and to nature, which is also pervasive. Canadians love the great outdoors and they love to find opportunities to connect to that nature in their backyard, down the street, around the corner, across town, on their bicycle, or with their walking shoes. And that's what the trail does.
Yeah, I don't think there's any easy solution, but I wouldn't go for a dominant ideology if it's not working. And I'm not defending the private sector at all here, but I just think that a predominantly public sector is kind of ruthless in the sense that it says if you don't need, you can't have immediately, or you have blocks on your access. So I think some alleviation of the public sector may be appropriate, but ultimately that's a political decision which would reflect the preferences of the Canadian population. And I'm certainly not going to tell any Canadians what to do.
All right, Sarah, maybe I can get you to come in here on the Schwele case, because you know what emerged from that case was the very strong signal sent by the court that if the Canadian Medicare system can't get people timely treatment to help their ailments, then it is legitimate for them to look to a different system to try to get timely treatment. What has been the impact of that decision over the years?
Well, it's a great question. At the time, there was this kind of shock. Like, is this going to increase the, options in the private sector? Are we going to have a sort of escalation in growth in the private health insurance market? And what we saw is that there wasn't much of a change. And on the sort of positive side, the government was really motivated to make some of these improvements that we're talking about. And I fully agree that we have constraints, we ration care based on wait lists, and that these wait lists are too long. But the government in Quebec decided to, use this, this court case to actually make improvements and set these benchmarks for what is a reasonable wait time for the priority procedures in the province. And in the combination of, ensuring these targets that were met, as well as the fact that physicians really didn't have the opportunity to work in both sectors. There's still other rules constraining physician behavior in Quebec, like in other provinces, that Alistair mentioned earlier around, you can't work in both the public system and the private system simultaneously. Those rules remained in place. And so we didn't see a huge escalation in private health insurance or in private parallel practice in that province. And so it's really interesting that it shows us that maybe we can address the problem of wait times with the currently publicly funded system, and prevent the kind of escalation of private insurance that many other governments across the world are trying to contain, and look to Canada to see what are the rules that we have in place that help us to maintain and protect the public system without allowing a growth of private health insurance that does tend to undermine equity goals. If we do have equity goals, then these might be worth maintaining. So it's a really interesting question. And in fact, in the Swedish government recently invited us to come and talk to them to say, how do we prevent the private health insurance from growing beyond, they're at about 2% of the population. They're worried that it's growing too high. How does Canada maintain this distinction? Wanted to learn about the context here because it was lauded as an exemplar.
I've still got a lot.
Really interesting to learn.
Forgive me, I still got a lot to get to here, but Colleen, I want a quick response from you, if I can, on the impact of the Schwele case and whether it had the both feared and/or other consequences that many wondered about.
It didn't result in the unbundling of or significant growth of a two-tier healthcare system in Quebec because of an adroit response by the Premier at the time to introduce wait time guarantees, as Sarah just said. But I think normatively it's had a big impact because, a bare majority of the Supreme Court indicated that, perhaps two-tier healthcare is some kind of an option. The devil's a lot in the detail. It was really a small challenge to the law that prohibits the purchase of private health insurance. Following on its heels, the much bigger challenge has been underway in the Canby case that Alistair is a witness in. And they're challenging all the rules. So the rules that stop doctors working in both public and private. It's a little unclear, but at first they were also challenging the rules that stop doctors billing above the amount that they are paid by the public system, the extra billing, and the private health insurance rules. So they're really going for the big kahuna, if you like, trying to knock over everything. And what the effect of that would be possibly chaos. And it would depend on the political stripe, probably, of the government in charge when, were that case to be successful. What would they do? Would they do as Quebec did, and try to protect the public healthcare system? Or would they say, yeehaw, let's let her rip, and we don't really like equality and equity and access anyway. We'd prefer the rich to have more. So it's a chaos kind of strategy.
I think I see Alistair trying to jump in on that. Alistair, did you want a word?
Well, I don't think it's all or nothing, right? You can have mediated extremes, and you can. I'm not saying it's not complex, but you're not going to have. You're absolutely right to pitch it as equity versus some form of enhanced choice and access. And it is true that the private health insurance would probably be taken up by the wealthier rather than the poorer in society for obvious reasons. But it could be progressive.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.